As a Polish writer writing about Turkey, I was surprised to see so many points that we are similar. I lived in Turkey for a year. I was a student and I lived in students' dorm and I shared life with Turks. So I think I know the country not from the perspective of alien, but I know the country from perspective of someone who loves it, who has a lot of passion for it, and who just love being there. I like very much coming for events like this because of people you meet. You meet fascinating writers from all angles of Europe. Sometimes last year I was in New York and it was even all angles of world, and you can share and exchange your ideas, and you can learn a lot from people you meet.
The book of essays we're going to talk about Turkey is called The Assassin from Apricot City, been translated by Antoine Lloyd-Jones, supported by English Pen and published by Stork Press. The author is Witold Szablowski. Welcome, Witold.
Good evening.
Now, what is it about Turkey that drew you to Turkey?
It's a wonderful country, full of contrasts, full of beautiful, good food.
And what about the links, though, with Poland and Turkey? Because that was probably the most surprising thing for me when I was reading this. I thought, my goodness, I hadn't realised that there were so many links of Turkey with Poland.
Was it interesting for you?
It was very interesting.
Good, because
yes.
I was afraid that it might be interesting for audience in Poland, but not necessarily for English-speaking.
I think it's interesting in the sense that it places Turkey in the broader Europe as well, too.
Yeah, we have a lot of links. Actually, this year we celebrate the 600 years of relationship with Turkey. But for me, the biggest surprise was that I studied in Turkey and I spent there a whole year, and then I went for a scholarship to Denmark. And in Turkey, I felt like home. From the first moment when my feet touched the ground, I felt like home. You have mosques, you have muezzins, you have the minarets, but still I felt very good there. And Denmark was a real culture shock for me.
Do you speak Turkish?
Biraz biliyorum ya. Evet.
Good. Yes, it sounds good to me.
I knew it much better than I know now, but since I began working as a journalist, it's not really good to speak to Turkish too good. Can I say too good?
You can say it, but
okay,
I won't correct you, but it's it's pretty good. Now look, before we talk about this fantastic collection of essays, and it's fantastic because not just because it's about Poland, but it's about it is about Turkey, it's about some amazing characters as well. Tell us a little bit about yourself, because you are a pretty well-known journalist in Poland. You've covered Polish issues. You worked for one of the great independent newspapers, Gazeta Wyborcza. You've worked for television. You've reported from the Balkans and Central Europe as well. Is this also just part of a reporting trip? Do you write books based on the reports that you've written for your journalism?
Yes and no, because my new book won't be based on my journalist reports, but this one, yes, it's based on what I wrote as a journalist about. And for a long time, I didn't think about writing a book. I thought that reporting for Gazeta Wyborcza is tiring enough, and I didn't.
Tiring enough.
Tiring.
Yes,
yeah.
it is. I should imagine.
Yeah, and I've never was so ambitious to write a book, but at some point I realized that if I collect the things I wrote, I had written before, it gives some kind of extra value to. I realized that all the stories I write are about one metaphor, because that happened when I heard for the first time Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan saying about Turkey as a bridge between Europe and Asia, between East and West, between tradition and modernity. And then I realized that all my characters are such a bridges, that all Turks that I know have such a bridges inside them, and they do this journey between Asia and Europe, this journey between modernity and tradition, this journey between Islam and the world which is not always friendly to Islam, and they have to cross this bridge every day inside them, maybe even a couple of dozens of or hundreds of times.
Now, the book is very up to date because it also covers the protests from last year. But tell us again why this title, but also what is the key link with Poland? Because there's a very central story, isn't there, which links this book, your book, with Poland.
There is a lot of links, and some of them are a little bit hidden. But the guy who was the assassin, his name is Mehmet Ali Aja, and he tried to kill the Pope in 1981. He didn't succeed, but still, I think everybody in Poland knows the story. And the Pope survived. Mehmet Ali Aja went to prison, and it was year 2006. My very first, not even my very first months, my very first days as a journalist. My first serious task as a journalist was to go to Turkey to interview him.
And what did you find? What kind of person? Where did you find him?
Fortunately, I didn't find him. Fortunately, because he was released from prison, and at the same time, it was my first job. I was working in tabloid called Nowy Dzień, which means New Day. Very nice tabloid and very stupid job. And I was covering everything related to the religion. I was covering, and that was the time when the Polish Pope was about, how to say that? We were waiting for the beatification of Polish Pope. So you know that there is two levels of being holy. Beatification and canonization. We just had the canonization, and in 2006 we were waiting for the beatification. And I was covering everything related to that. And after 2 months of that job, I was the first person in the history of this newspaper to be fired. They didn't like the way I covered John Paul II. Probably it wasn't serious enough. It's not nice to be fired, even if you don't like your job. So I went to the editor-in-chief of the Nowy Dzień to argue, and I just needed an argument to not be fired. So I said, you know, I'm going to do something that no one in this newspaper can do. He said, yes, what? I said, I'm going to Turkey to interview Mehmet Ali Aja. He said, okay, can you do that? I said, yes, I studied in Turkey. At least I can try. So they sent me to Turkey. I thought that, well, I didn't believe that I could find Mehmet Ali Aja because all the world media were looking for him and were trying to interview him. That it was a free trip to Turkey. And I remember the moment when I'm sitting with my Turkish friends, telling them, and they are trying to say, come on, maybe you can find it. Or if you cannot find Mehmet Ali Aja, you can still find another job. And then they heard in news that he was taken back to prison. And that was, like you say in Turkish and in Arabic, mashallah. A great thing which happened to me. Because when Mehmet Ali Aja was taken back to prison, I had the opportunity to meet all his friends, his family, his fiancée, his lawyer, and all the people that had never been interviewed before and who said a couple of interesting stories. And
many of them in the stories, in the book as well. And Apricot City?
It's Malatya, the biggest exporter of apricots in the whole world.
And you also learn that in that book. But the other thing is, too, you look at so many issues in Turkish life today. You look at honor killings, you look at women in society, you look at culture, arts. You also do a very good portrait of Erdogan without actually meeting him as well, too. I mean, did you want to just interview, if you like, the people round the stories and the background of the stories, or did you try to interview some of the really big names as well?
I think there are so many people who try to interview politicians that I don't want to join this group.
So you decided at the beginning, I don't want to interview Prime Minister, President.
I think I can learn much more about. That would be great to meet him. I tried a couple of times, but I think they already knew what kind of stories I write, and probably because he was in Poland twice. Since I'm a journalist of Gazeta Wyborcza, they know my work and they never let me meet him. So, but I think there is one sentence. I talk with a lorry driver because as a student I hitchhiked a lot, and I did the tour from Warsaw to Jerusalem and back. And I think you have some of scenes in this book are from that journey, and there is a dialogue with a lorry driver when he asks, "But why don't you take a bus?" I say, "Because I meet people like you, because people like you can tell me much more interesting things."
Is that what you think makes a good journalist?
Depends what kind of journalist you want to be. If you want to make a political analyzing, you need to meet politicians. But I studied political science. I met a couple of politicians as a student, and I have enough.
You're speaking to a journalist. Now, one thing you do, it's a kind of literary, it is a literary reportage, and you do say at some point that many of the characters are fictional, or aspects of the characters are, some of the things you've made up, imagined?
No,
nothing.
nothing.
It's all
Everything.
true.
If I write that somebody's taking medicines, I double check that. If I say somebody has blue eyes, I triple check that. Yeah, everything is checked.
So it's a kind of political travel reportage.
I hope not. Political?
It is. It's a very political book.
I mean,
look at the issues you look at. You look at immigration, migration. You look at the Kurds. You look at the role of women in society. It's very political.
But when I write about the immigration, I talk with immigrants, not with politicians. But well, that chapter got the European Parliament award, and I hope at least some politicians read that one, at least that one.
It has been incredibly well received on this book too. I mean, as you say, you've won this particular award from the European Parliament. You've won lots of other awards for the writing, because it's beautiful writing as well. I mean,
Thank you, Rosie.
You must be very proud of the writing. That's what, using the word literary reportage is a great compliment.
Thank you. Yeah, we had Kapuściński, so
Well, you've been compared with Richard Kapuściński. That must be one of the greatest compliments for.
It isn't, because it's a horrible challenge. Because
do you feel the pressure?
In Poland, Kapuściński have a circle of the devoted lovers. And they don't like me because in one interview in Poland I said that we have to forget that we ever had Kapuściński. Because he went too high. You can't follow this guy. It's impossible.
Well, you're very young, so you've got a way to go, and you're doing very well. Now, just before we have the reading, there are a couple of things. I need to ask you, first of all, something about Bulgarian dancing bears. I was asked to ask you about the Bulgarian dancing bears. Who?
Thank you for asking. Yeah.
I was paid a lot of money to ask that question.
It wasn't me who asked you to ask, but if you ask, it's my new book, and I just love it. I mean, it's.
Is it called Bulgarian Dancing Bears?
In Bulgaria, not only in Bulgaria, in Balkans, in Poland too, Gypsy used to train bears for dancing. A little cub was taken from the zoo garden or from circus or from the wood, if it was an orphan cub, and was trained by gypsies to dance. It was a stupid performance, like, the gypsy were playing a violin or any other instrument, and the bear was doing something like this, and people were paying money for that. And I heard the story that those bears had been taken from the gypsy since EU came, because EU said, gypsy, you are not allowed to train the bears anymore. So they took the bears from them, they opened a special park for them, and they teach them what freedom is. They had special rings in their noses, so they took the rings out, and day by day, step